Hey, my name's Greg Holder. I'm the lead pastor of The Crossing, one church with multiple locations in the St. Louis area. And long before we had some of the fun stuff that's going on right now, we were meeting in a community theater in a YMCA just outside of St. Louis. And to be honest with you, we were struggling. I mean, my aha moment is actually a pretty tough time in ministry because the pastor who had planted this church was long gone, and things were tough. And to be honest with you, there was no way we were going to fill the 350-seat auditorium where we were meeting that day. And so we just called it out. To be honest with you, we just admitted that instead of just being a bunch of BBs rolling around in a box, we just asked everybody to come up on the stage with us that day. And so we sit in a big circle, and instead of it being a moment of defeat, God surprised me. Instead of it being a moment where we just sort of looked at each other and said, maybe this isn't going to happen, God actually did something. It turns out people started telling their stories. They started telling stories of how much everybody else in the circle meant to them. They started telling stories of how God had changed their life, of hope, of forgiveness. We heard stories of people who were saying no to lucrative job offers outside of town so that they could stay here in St. Louis to be a part of this church. People looked at each other and said, I'm not giving up on this thing. See, we're going to do this together. People may call us crazy. Maybe something like this could never happen in a place like St. Louis. Maybe the whole thing's going to go down in flames. But we're going to do this together. God's called us to do this together as, well, one. Of course, you know that's the plan, right? I mean, you know that that's what God wants for each of us. I mean, you're familiar with the story in John 17. It's the night of Jesus' betrayal, and before he's arrested, he ends up praying even for us. And I know you're familiar with these verses, but let me just read a couple of things to you here. Jesus is praying for us when he says, I pray that all of them may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me, that they may be one as we are one. So, what is it that matters so much to Jesus in that moment? I mean, what is it that Jesus prays for us? That we would be one as he and the Father are one. Now, I know there's no way we're going to fully reflect the beauty and the mystery that is the Trinity, but for some reason, Jesus puts this in that context, that we are to love each other in a way that the world will take notice. We're to be that kind of community, that unified, that together. So that means that when we tolerate gossip in a conversation, when we put people down in kind of clever or funny ways behind their back, when we don't play well with the other kids on the playground, when we think that our church is the only church that really has it going on in the city, when we think that our ministry is really the only ministry in the church that's cool or that really knows what's going on, when you roll your eyes at somebody because they're too old or they're too young or because of the way they dress or because of the music they listen to, when you go into a theological discussion with absolutely no humility, when you exclude or ignore or mock, the whole thing unravels. This dream, this prayer that Jesus had for us, it just begins to fall apart. See, Jesus wants us to be one as he and the Father are one. And I got to tell you, that's a little bit of what happened for me that day on a community theater stage outside of St. Louis. We just looked at each other and said, you know what, whatever else happens, we're going to preserve the gift of relationship that God has given us. We're going to actually come together and do what we need to do to protect this thing, because it matters to us, but it also matters to Jesus. Now, am I telling you that we have this all figured out? Am I telling you that we still don't royally mess things up? No. I mean, we have our moments, believe me. But I am going to tell you that we never get very far away from this idea. And it affects all sorts of things. It affects our decision making. It affects the way we train up leaders. So we'll tell new leaders and new hires that come into our place that there really is a language, for instance, that preserves and protects community. There is something that helps to foster trust, and you need to learn that language. We'll tell people about the spiritual discipline of learning what it means to collaborate with others, what it means to celebrate a success in a ministry that does not have your name on it. If you're a leader around here, one of the things that we will continually tell you is that you have a certain weight when you go into a meeting. You have a certain power, a certain influence. How do you use that? Are you always the first person to speak? Are you always the last person to speak? Do you always tilt the table towards you? See, this affects everything. I got to tell you, that day when I looked around the chairs on that stage, I began to realize two things. One, I can't do this alone, and two, I don't want to do it alone. So it even informs our spiritual formation process. So you're going to hear about John 17 real early with us. You'll hear about it at our newcomers dinners. By the time you get to the closest thing we have to a membership class, you'll hear about it, this thing we call Body Life. I'll ramp up on it pretty big. And then for the next 6 weeks, you'll hear about what it means to resolve conflict in a healthy way, what it means to establish boundaries and to say yes and no to other people, what it means to forgive, because we are going to bump into each other. See, this is a big deal to us. It's a part of our DNA. And in some ways, it goes back to a community theater stage outside of St. Louis. Now, I know this is painfully obvious. I know that some of you are already rolling your eyes at me, but for us, this is a big deal. For us, this is intentional. It takes a lot of work, but I guarantee you it's worth it. It's why we can celebrate. It's how we can dream together. It's why we're more creative. It's how we face failure, how we enter into church discipline. It's one of those things that just helps us to actually enjoy each other better. It's why Lone Rangers don't last very long around here. It's why this is still fun for me more than a decade later, even though we can't all fit on the stage anymore. Being one is important to me. It's important to us. It's important to Jesus. And we do everything we can not to forget that.